At the end of 2025, Boston Review of Books published an English-language book titled A War I Cannot Understand. It tells the story of Pan Wenyang, a university student from Taiwan, who traveled to the Ukrainian front lines twice to fight in support of Ukraine. The book is also accompanied by dozens of photographs taken by Ukrainian military photographer Alex Saklitsky. Today's article is the editor's note. If you wish to purchase this book, you can do so on the websites of JF Bookstore, Amazon, and Barnes & Noble. Now, please listen to the full text. And the world remains silent. Viewing the Russia-Ukraine war through the lens of a Taiwanese volunteer soldier. I learned about Pan Wenyang through Chai Jing's channel program. In March 2025, Chai Jing's channel produced 2 episodes about Chinese soldiers in the Russia-Ukraine war, including Chinese mercenary Makaron fighting for Russia in the Russian army, and volunteer soldiers fighting for Ukraine in the Ukrainian International Legion, Gao Shan, Tianxia Weigong, Zeng Sheng-guang, Wu Zhong-da, Peng Chenliang, Pan Wenyang, and other anonymous volunteers who were interviewed. These soldiers in the Ukrainian International Legion come from diverse backgrounds and even have subtle political differences. However, on the Russia-Ukraine battlefield, they became brothers who faced life and death together, united by death. Chai Jing's program meticulously reconstructed the scenes of the deaths of Taiwanese volunteer Wu Zhong-da and Chinese volunteer Peng Chenliang, who were Pan Wenyang's best friends in the International Legion. In the footage, Pan Wenyang said, "I don't know how to express why it hurts so much." On camera, Pan Wenyang looks very much like a typical Taiwanese college student, thin, refined, and gentle. Without his military uniform, it would be hard to associate him with a soldier. In fact, Pan Wenyang had just returned to Taiwan from the front lines of the Russia-Ukraine war. This was his second return from the front lines. In September 2023, 24-year-old Taiwanese college student Pan Wenyang took a leave of absence from Ursuline University of Languages, where he was studying, and lied to his family, claiming he was going to study in Poland. He traveled alone by plane to Poland, and then crossed the border into Ukraine to join the Ukrainian International Legion. At that time, the Russia-Ukraine war had been ongoing for 1 year and 7 months. On February 24, 2022, Russia launched a special military operation, invading Ukraine from multiple directions, targeting Kiev, Kharkiv, Donbass, and southern Ukraine, but met fierce resistance from Ukraine. On September 30th, Russian President Vladimir Putin held a ceremony in the Kremlin in Moscow, announcing the formal annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, and signed accession treaties with pro-Russian leaders of these regions. However, the Russian military did not fully control these areas, particularly in parts of Kherson and Donetsk, where fighting continued. In September and November 2022, Ukrainian forces recaptured Kharkiv and Kherson regions. Subsequently, Donetsk Oblast in eastern Ukraine became the main battlefield, with fighting concentrated in cities such as Bakhmut, Mariupol, Donetsk, Avdiivka, Mariinka, and Volnovakha. In November 2023, after 8 weeks of training at the recruit camp, Pan Wenyang was sent to the front lines. Prior to this, both Russian and Ukrainian forces were locked in a trench warfare stalemate in Bakhmut and Avdiivka, with limited progress for either side. On November 10th, Pan Wenyang arrived at a village near Bakhmut, his first time at the front. However, before the fighting fully began, his comrades started falling one after another, especially his team leader and spiritual idol, Eric, whose death caused Pan Wenyang to lose courage. After retreating from the front lines to the rear, Pan Wenyang applied to terminate his contract, and in January of the following year, he returned to Taiwan. In July 2024, Pan Wenyang and his hometown friend Wu Zhong-da flew from Taiwan's Taoyuan airport to Ukraine again, joining the Ukrainian International Legion for the second time. In October, Pan Wenyang and Wu Zhong-da entered the front lines in Chasiv Yar, located in the Bakhmut district of Donetsk Oblast, the same region as his first deployment. This time, however, it was not a village on the outskirts of Bakhmut, but a forest near the city of Chasiv Yar. In this forest, Pan Wenyang experienced 18 days of hellish, intense combat. During the 18 days of fighting in the Chasiv Yar forest, Pan Wenyang lost 24 comrades, with 10 others seriously injured, including his close friend Wu Zhong-da. From then on, Pan Wenyang felt that a part of himself was buried with his comrades in that forest. In February 2025, he returned to Taiwan and began writing about his first-hand experiences on the Russia-Ukraine battlefield, which became this book. Since the Russia-Ukraine war broke out in February 2022, its brutality has been widely reported in global media, focusing primarily on its impact on civilians, the destruction of infrastructure, and systematic human rights violations. But how brutal is the battlefield itself? What is the reality of soldiers' casualties? There seems to be little reporting on this, and understandably, it is difficult to report. Pan Wenyang's account directly describes the 18 days of fighting in the Chasiv Yar forest, confronting readers with the front lines of the Russia-Ukraine war, helping them understand how this 21st century war is fought, and why Pan Wenyang described the battle as a giant meat grinder. When Pan Wenyang arrived in Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine war had already reached a stalemate, with both sides repeatedly contesting narrow front lines in eastern Ukraine. The widespread use of modern weapons such as drones, artillery, precision-guided missiles, and landmines, combined with traditional infantry tactics, resulted in an extremely high death rate on the battlefield. Soldiers in exposed trenches or open fields were easy targets, often unable to see each other, yet constantly bombarded by artillery shells. When Pan Wenyang went to the front lines for the second time, he was thrust into this meat grinder battlefield, characterized by high casualty rates and relentless attrition, its bloodiness and brutality comparable to the trench warfare of World War I. On November 10, 2023, after completing 8 weeks of recruit training, Pan Wenyang went with his comrades to the Bakhmut front in Donetsk Oblast. Earlier, in May 2022, Russian forces began shelling the area, launching a strong offensive on August 1st. After 10 months of intense fighting, in May 2023, Russia claimed full control of the Bakhmut district. On June 5th, Ukrainian forces launched a counteroffensive in the Bakhmut district, recapturing several key locations near Bakhmut city by September, but failing to fully retake the city itself. Russian and Ukrainian forces continued to battle back and forth in villages near Bakhmut. This was when Pan Wenyang entered the battlefield. At the same time, Russian forces launched a large-scale offensive on another city in Donetsk Oblast, Avdiivka. Deploying significant forces, including regular troops and the Wagner Group, they employed meat grinder tactics, attempting to break through Ukrainian defenses with human wave assaults. Avdiivka quickly became another massive meat grinder after Bakhmut. Many of Pan Wenyang's comrades from the recruit camp were sent to this highly dangerous location, and one of his instructors, Denis, was reported killed in Avdiivka within a week. Pan Wenyang received this devastating news while preparing for combat in a safe house on the Bakhmut front. Subsequently, in that same safe house, Pan Wenyang received news of the death of his team leader, Eric, followed by the deaths of Ragnar, Dog, and Sierra. In July 2024, Pan Wenyang and Wu Zhong-da returned to Ukraine to join the Ukrainian International Legion, at a time when the Russia-Ukraine war had entered an even more intense stalemate. Both sides, exhausted by the high attrition of prolonged warfare, saw increasingly fierce battles on the front lines. Following the Bakhmut campaign, May 2022 to May 2023, and the Avdiivka campaign, October 2023 to February 2024, Russian forces shifted their focus, targeting Chasiv Yar, approximately 10 to 15 kilometers west of Bakhmut. On April 4, 2024, Russian forces launched their first direct assault on Chasiv Yar. At the same time, in August 2024, Ukrainian forces initiated a cross-border offensive into Russia's Kursk Oblast. The emergence of the Kursk front diverted significant Ukrainian forces, making the fighting in Donetsk Oblast's front lines even more challenging. In October, Russian forces breached the Canal Defense Line, entering the center of Chasiv Yar and occupying most of the city. Ukrainian forces retreated to the western and southern parts of the city, where fighting remained intense, primarily in the form of urban warfare. The three major battlefields in Donetsk Oblast, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Chasiv Yar, became infamous as meat grinders. A 2024 report by Asia Times noted that Russian casualties in eastern Ukraine reached up to 1,000 per day. These battlefields terrified most soldiers, and volunteers in the Ukrainian International Legion were no exception. Pan Wenyang and Wu Zhong-da returned to the Ukrainian International Legion in July. Upon arrival, Pan Wenyang found that the Legion was no longer merely assisting Ukrainian forces, but had become a main force on the front lines. At this point, volunteers in the Ukrainian International Legion were not only sent to the front lines, but also tasked with the most dangerous assault missions. The Legion's 1st Battalion, due to heavy casualties, had to be disbanded for the second time, and the entire Legion was given a 1-month break for reorganization. Pan Wenyang's 2nd Battalion was entirely converted into a light infantry assault unit, the most dangerous type of unit on the Russia-Ukraine battlefield, often referred to by both Russian and Ukrainian soldiers as cannon fodder. Pan Wenyang was assigned such dangerous tasks in the forests near Chasiv Yar. While heading to the frontline position, Pan Wenyang once noticed a team of Ukrainian soldiers in a trench, led by a young, boyish team leader, with the rest of the soldiers mostly over 60 years old. During his 2 trips to Ukraine, Pan Wenyang repeatedly observed war weariness among Ukrainian soldiers, and even heard of some who suffered mental breakdowns after multiple deployments to the front. Whenever news of heavy casualties from fierce battles reached the rear, the Ukrainian International Legion would experience waves of desertions. On October 13, 2024, Pan Wenyang entered the forest near Chasiv Yar to join the fighting, as Ukrainian forces were retreating under relentless Russian attacks. In the Chasiv Yar forest, Pan Wenyang and his comrades endured 18 days of combat, shifting from assault to defense and back to assault, with bombs falling like rain on their forest, leaving it strewn with blood and flesh. These infantrymen faced circling drones or suicide drones overhead, anti-personnel mines scattered on the ground, and artillery shells raining down at any moment. Once detected by a drone, stepping on a mine, firing a shot, or being spotted by thermal imaging, they would be immediately pinpointed, followed by dozens of artillery shells raining down, killing many soldiers instantly. On this battlefield, guns were of little use, and as a machine gunner, Pan Wenyang was an even easier target for artillery. He was taught to change positions immediately after firing a shot, or he would be precisely targeted and have no chance of survival. When Pan Wenyang entered the Chasiv Yar forest, the land before him had been bombarded repeatedly by artillery, turning black, like a scene from hell. In the first battle in the forest, nearly all the Sri Lankan and Colombian soldiers in Pan Wenyang's company were killed or injured. In the second battle, Pan Wenyang's 9-man squad accidentally entered a death zone, and he witnessed his close friend Wu Zhong-da's waist being blown open by a bomb, dying in agony nearby, powerless to help. In those 18 days of 2 battles, Pan Wenyang saw his comrades fall one by one, with a total of 24 killed and 10 seriously injured. The dead included not only Ukrainian soldiers, but also Russian soldiers. During a Russian encirclement in the Chai forest, Pan Wenyang was forced to use his machine gun to kill a Russian soldier. He felt unbelievable and trembled all over, as he had killed a complete stranger, which pained him deeply. In fact, in Chai Jing's Russia-Ukraine interviews, she first spoke with a Chinese youth named Makaron, a mercenary in the Russian army. In the program, Makaron described the Russian side's situation as even worse than the Ukrainian side's. He fought in Bakhmut, the same front Pan Wenyang visited during his first deployment. Because Ukrainian forces refused to abandon the city, Russian forces remained stationed there, and Makaron was among them. On the Russia-Ukraine battlefield, the Russian army employed human wave tactics, resulting in casualty rates several times higher than those of the Ukrainians, making Makaron realize he could die at any moment. When Makaron tried to leave, he was told his contract would automatically renew until the war ended, and he was even briefly imprisoned in a dungeon by the Russian army. After 18 days of fighting in the forest, Pan Wenyang retreated to a safe house, only to learn of the death of his close friend Peng Chenliang. Peng Chenliang was originally a drone operator, but applied to join Pan Wenyang's 2nd Battalion to fight alongside him. Before his official transfer, he was sent to Toretsk, a small town a dozen kilometers from the Bakhmut front, for a reconnaissance mission. The mission was unexpectedly extended, and due to insufficient manpower, inadequate equipment, and lack of support, Peng Chenliang was killed. On October 29th, as Pan Wenyang prepared for a second counteroffensive in the Chai forest, he sent a message to Peng Chenliang but received no reply. On the afternoon of November 4th, upon hearing of Peng Chenliang's death, Pan Wenyang sent another message, asking if the news was true. "I miss you so much." This time, Peng Chenliang would never reply. Within a week, Pan Wenyang lost his 2 closest brothers in the Ukrainian International Legion, Wu Zhong-da, who was like a father, taking him through streets and alleys to find good food, and Peng Chenliang, who was like a brother, cooking dumplings for him at home. Pan Wenyang felt that his family in Ukraine was gone, and his spiritual pillar in the Legion had collapsed once again. Since February 2022, how many people have been killed or injured in the Russia-Ukraine war? The Russian government has released no official data, while Ukraine periodically publishes figures, though they are generally believed to be lower than the actual numbers. According to estimates by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, SIS, from February 2022 to May 2025, Russian military deaths numbered approximately 250,000, with total casualties exceeding 950,000, projected to reach 1 million by the summer of 2025. A joint estimate by BBC Russia and the Russian independent media outlet Mediazona, as of May 2025, put Russian military deaths between 170,000 and 246,000, with 111,368 identified by name, and total casualties likely higher. SIS estimated Ukrainian military deaths between 60,000 and 100,000, with total casualties around 400,000. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's updated data from February 2025 reported over 46,000 military deaths and 380,000 injuries, aligning closely with SIS estimates. The United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, confirmed that, as of April 30, 2025, at least 13,134 Ukrainian civilians were killed and 31,867 injured, noting that the actual figures are likely higher due to difficulties in collecting data in war zones. As the war continued, this high casualty rate also affected the Ukrainian International Legion, leading to low morale and insufficient volunteer recruitment. When Ukrainian President Zelensky announced the formation of the Ukrainian International Legion on February 27, 2022, Ukrainian officials claimed over 20,000 volunteers from 52 countries had signed up. The New York Times, March 25, 2023. And Kiev Independent questioned these numbers, estimating a maximum of 3,000 to 4,000 volunteers, dropping sharply to 1,000 to 2,000 by May 2024. Many volunteers feared becoming cannon fodder, significantly reducing their willingness to join the Ukrainian battlefield. However, for Pan Wenyang, who experienced the war firsthand, these were not just numbers, but his brothers. Every corpse, every way of dying, has become an indelible memory for me. Carrying the indelible memories of death, grief, and fear, Pan Wenyang returned to Taiwan in February 2025 and completed this first-hand account of the war. In daily life, he is not an eloquent person, even somewhat tongue-tied and inarticulate, but in his heart, many voices intertwine, shouting and weeping. He felt that he could not find peace unless he wrote these voices down, that he had to write them out. He wanted to write about his sorrow, fear, anger, doubts, despair, and questioning of the meaning of war, the meaning of life, and the meaning of this world. Before going to the Russia-Ukraine battlefield, Pan Wenyang studied political philosophy and international relations at university. The lofty vocabulary and theories in the classroom, though difficult to understand, were something he deeply believed in. The future of the world lay within them. After returning from the battlefield to the classroom, Pan Wenyang's thoughts would involuntarily drift to the distant Ukrainian battlefield. He didn't know how to explain his feelings to classmates who had never experienced the battlefield. Because justice, truth, courage, and victory were no longer abstract concepts, but the flesh and blood of the comrades he lived with day and night. When the media reports on the Russia-Ukraine war, when scholars comment on it, when politicians haggle over it, when people discuss it and sing war songs, they always revolve around abstract terms like democracy versus dictatorship, freedom versus brutality, resistance versus aggression, courage versus evil, but rarely talk about the living individuals on the battlefield, the living lives. They were so kind, so wonderful, Pan Wenyang said, in Adam Hochschild's book Spain in Our Hearts. Americans in the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939, Albert Camus is quoted as saying, "My generation keeps Spain in their hearts. There they learned that one can be just but still be defeated, that force can conquer the spirit, and that courage often goes unrewarded." When I showed this quote to Pan Wenyang, he exclaimed, "Yes, that's exactly it." Pan Wenyang even occasionally felt confused, unsure of whom he was fighting for, who was orchestrating the war, and who would ultimately reap its rewards. The above is half of the article. For the rest, please go to the book review to read the full text.